get started. We may have other people join us later, but welcome to our live chat week 4. I know I'm going to say this the whole quarter, but I can't believe it's week 4. Just that these quarters go by so quickly. So it seems like everybody's really getting used to the basic swing of the course. So our basic structure, which is we have our rhythm of the Thursday posts and then the Sunday responding to 2 people. And then we have 3 different assessments. And so we have an assessment that we have for this week. And then you have a paper to write based on that. And then you have all the readings and the videos, and then this live chat. So that's really and then we will have our final paper at the end of the quarter, which will be a culmination of the readings and the videos and everything you've been working so diligently to do in the past few weeks. So I just want to stop there. Are there any questions about anything in terms of the structure of the course? Anything that we're doing that still doesn't quite click for you?
So I read the material, some of the material, like I really enjoy reading, but I find it's too much than I can digest well. You know, some of the stuff I just like, because there's a lot, so I just like fast reading. And is it necessary that I take notes or all those, you know, the videos and the reading material, the key ideas or concepts that is it necessary that will we be tested on all those?
Great question. So there's not any kind of formal written test that's going to test your knowledge or test even that you've read and watched the videos that you have. But I would say your final paper is weighted pretty high, and so in that final paper, you'll be choosing one particular lens that we've learned about. So it might be embodied cognition, or it might be trauma, and from that, you will definitely pull deeply from the videos, from the reading to inform your final paper. So that's really the place. And my hope is that you would pull in a lot of your readings and your videos as you go, because they're connected, right? Like embodiedness is connected to trauma. And so there may be ways in which you're pulling in various readings and videos throughout the quarter. But in terms of, do I need to take notes because am I going to get tested on this? No, there's not any tests that we're going to do. It really comes out in your reflections. So if you are able to reflect, so for the power and privilege that the assessment that we're going to do this week, if you're able to pull in some of your readings that you're doing on embedded cognition, because they fit together, that's really going to make a stronger paper, a stronger assignment. So if you're able to pull things in to the ways that you're already doing your writings, that would be great. If you, some people like to take notes, some people don't. I think that's your personal preference. So does that help?
Yeah. So I find out that I could digest, like, let's say, maybe 30 to 50%. Is that normal, or is that designed that way, or that's I don't know how that.
Yeah, I appreciate your honest questions, Ping. Part of what we're trying to do is we're creating a new course, and so this is the second quarter that we've had this course, and so I think the feedback, and this is really helpful feedback from lots of students, is that it's perhaps a little too weighted on some of the psychological science articles, and perhaps well, no one has said this, I don't want to read that in, so that perhaps that needs to be considered, that we take out some of the psychological science articles. Perhaps instead of having 3, we just have 1 good one or something like that. So I think you're okay that some of it is kind of not really landing. I think in future quarters, we're going to try and kind of get down to the nitty gritty of what are the important videos and articles. I would say that the videos especially the ones that are those little bite-sized videos, are pretty critical. They're easy to digest. You can take notes or not, but I think that those videos get to the heart of what we're reading, what we're learning about. And then usually there's one key text each week that we've split into two, right? So it's half one week and then half the other. I would say that's a critical part of your assignments, is to do the reading. I find that the theological articles, Dr. Cherry and others, I think that's how you say her last name, are very helpful. But if some of the other cognitive psychological pieces are kind of over your head, you can set them aside and try and get the gist of what the course is about for that week.
Thank you.
Do your best. And thank you for your feedback. And I would encourage you on your feedback evaluation at the end of the quarter that you put that down. Just be honest, like some of these articles where I'm getting about 30 to 50% of this. That'll be helpful for us to know so that we can keep making this course better.
Thank you.
Other questions? That's a great question. Paul, some were quite technical. I agree. Yeah. I think some of that will shift in the future. So thanks for bearing with it as we try to get a good sense of how to do this course. It's really, again, like I said before, it's the first time we've done something like this. So like how much pastoral work are we doing? How much psychological science pieces are we putting in? I think it's that measure, that balance we're trying to figure out. So, okay, so I'm just going to do a really quick recap as I looked back through last week with our trauma work, and then this week as we're doing embodied cognition, embodied and embedded cognition. We're kind of doing both of those. I thought I'd just do a recap of some of the important points and then throw it open to you guys, and we can either talk about something I said or we can bring up anything else that is interesting to you. So as a recap, last week we looked at trauma and a trauma-informed perspective, because that's what we're hoping you all will bring from this course is, again, not that you're becoming therapists, but that you can walk into situations being trauma-informed. We learned about the importance of stories, and I really loved Dr. Bryant Davis talking about how it's important to remember that everyone has a story before this current moment, right? And so part of our work is understanding, part of our work as ministers and as chaplains is stepping into that space and understanding what was the story that was here before? How can I appreciate and hear that story well? How can I honor that story? I really appreciated the very basic counseling skill that was given, that you need to match a person's content of their story rather than their affect. So a person could be smiling and laughing and saying something really sad and really hard and traumatic. That person is not well integrated, right? Sometimes to be able to match their own, perhaps they're going through PTSD or they're not able to regulate their emotions to match their story. If you match your affect, if you smile with them, they are going to feel missed. And so it's a weird counseling trick, but to actually kind of be able to match your affect to the story will help that person then kind of settle into what they're saying. So I really appreciated that counseling trick. Dr. Cynthia Erickson spoke about the need to grow in our capacity to suffer with others in their pain, and the ways we can do that we can develop resilience and recovery in our own journeys, and that we can think about self-regulation. So it's kind of like applying that brake pedal, right? When we feel ourselves flipping our lid, right? When we go, whoa, and we're kind of dysregulated, that there's ways that we can learn how to do self-regulation to bring us back to neutral. And a lot of the meditation practices, the mindfulness practices that we're doing, that helps us to be able to self-regulate when we kind of, again, flip our lid in some ways. So this week we turned into embodied cognition. And I'm happy to get more into this discussion with you. But it's the idea that we think with our bodies. And a way that kind of in the past we thought about thinking is that the brain was kind of like the software system, right? And this body is just this neutral thing that takes in the information. But it goes back through, I see that question, one sec, I'm Ping. Thank you for that. So our body just takes in this information, but it's really the software is in the brain. So the ways that we think about this now is that our bodies aren't just taking in, they're actually taking in information in a way that shapes how we think. So our bodies matter in how we take in information. How I take in the information in my body that goes to my brain is going to be different than Colin's because we have different bodies, right? We have been embedded in different contexts over time. And both of those things shape how we think. So causes a whole lot of different ways we can think about how we influence one another in our own context, how we have been ourselves shaped by our contexts, which we'll get to some of the implicit biases that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then I want to go back here to Ping, what you said. Okay, embodied cognition. Yes. Let me keep going here and then we'll circle back to embodied cognition. Great question. So, and then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to take an implicit bias test this week, tests too, one on race and one on gender. And I just wanted to touch briefly on this and talk about how we think about bias and how we think about prejudice. In the cognitive sciences, interestingly enough, the notion of bias and prejudice, like cognitive bias, cognitive prejudice, they're not negative or pejorative per se. They're actually just more descriptive. So it's more of a sociological understanding that we all bear within us certain biases that are natural. They come from the ways that we were raised, like in highly communal, highly socialized creatures, from a nuclear family to a tribe, that we are sociologically, we can really only have about 150 people in our in-group. And then as soon as you get outside of that in-group, everybody else is the other, right? Everybody else is like those other people. We have a natural bias to be biased towards the people of our in-group and against the people in our out-group. Now, knowing that, we don't just leave it there, right? The challenge for us is that we have to reflect on those internal biases that we have. So these implicit biases tests kind of unearth or make transparent some ways that we have been shaped, the ways that our contexts have shaped us, that perhaps are malaligned with the gospel. And so how is it that we think through where we're operating without awareness, where we're making judgments on another people group? And that, right, over time turns into these malformed systems that work against other people, or they're malformed feelings or prejudiced feelings against another person or another group of people. So I guess I say all of this, and I'm happy to circle back around if we want to talk about it. But if you find in these implicit biases tests that you do indeed have bias, the point is not to say you're terrible, you're bad, you're sinful, you may as well just give up with the helping profession, right? I mean, the point is to say, okay, these are things that are a part of who I am, and they're not aligned with the gospel if I'm not aware of my implicit bias, if I'm not aware that I choose my own people over people that I think are in an out group. And so what we're hoping to do is unearth all of that. So I just said a lot there. I want to pause. King, I know that you want to talk a bit more about embodied cognition, and I'm happy to do that. But from what I said there, was there any thoughts or responses you'd want to bring up?
I guess pardon me. I guess the only thing that I would, I don't know, kind of confess to is sometimes I get a little bit uncomfortable, not in a bad way, but just there's some discomfort around looking at biases because, I know that I'm not supposed to have them, or I believe that I'm not supposed to have them. And I believe that I am supposed to, if I do have them, sort of act in a way that runs counter to them so that they don't interfere with the way I might treat a particular person. But even just sort of, realizing those things about myself and kind of recognizing those things about myself, that can be a little bit uncomfortable. So I guess I'm looking forward to the test to learn more and see more about, some of the ways that I'm holding on to things that I don't necessarily want to be holding on to.
Yeah, Colin, thank you. Thanks for saying that. I wonder if there's any responses, any thoughts that you guys have.
So I've already taken the tests, and I'll say on one of them, my first response was I was a little bit disappointed in myself, but as Professor Amy said, it is kind of what it is, and they're not perfect tests, so you don't know if it's absolutely accurate. But to me, it was okay. You need to be aware of your biases, and just try not to allow that to cause a bad outcome. In a certain situations. So that's kind of how I looked at it when I took the test and then thought about it. Because I was really surprised with one of the results quite a bit, given what my upbringing was, where I grew up, who I interacted with, etc. I was surprised. But where I grew up and where I interacted with was a very, very long time ago, and I've been in regular society ever since. So maybe that's, but I don't know. I just felt I just now need to be a little bit more aware.
Yeah, I think it's more about awareness versus not having biases, because we all have them and they're not necessarily bad. I'm not sure which test, like what tests, how many tests they are, but one of the ones that I took was about cats and dogs. And at the end, it was like, you have a clear bias towards dogs. And I was like, I know that. I have no desire to change that. That's not something that will ever change for me. So it's good to know it. But I think what could be an issue is if I start acting on it to a way that's detrimental to the people who love cats or cat owners. My brother and his wife just bought a cat and I was supposed to go visit, and I've been working on that on myself so I can be loving when I'm there in their presence. So I think it's more of an awareness thing versus a change your biases, especially when it's not a harmful bias. Like we have when it comes to food, we have it when it comes to colors. It's all around us all the time, just based on our upbringings and based on our preferences.
Yeah, thanks for this conversation, everyone. I think, again, I appreciate, Colin, your honesty of just kind of like, this makes me feel uncomfortable. And I think, well, I'm not hearing this from you, but I think the tendency could be, this makes me feel uncomfortable, therefore I don't want to unearth this. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to feel bad about myself, or I don't want to, in church language, be sinful. And I think there is some just kind of courage to step in and say, this is kind of the way that we're created, is to prefer some people in our in-group and some in our out-group, prefer cats and dogs. I'd probably be in the middle of that because I like them both, but really kind of pressing into, if I have these implicit biases and I don't uncover them, then they may come out at a time when it is unhelpful and it is painful to the other person. And so if I'm able to do this in what is a bit more of a controlled environment, which is our course, with only Laura and I reading your papers and interacting with you, that there might be some things that can be unearthed that could be helpful down the road. So yeah, just some thoughts there. Great conversations. Yeah, I took the ambivalent sexism, is that what it's called? Yeah, and I have some stuff against women. I didn't realize. So, it's interesting. I kind of want to dig into that and uncover it, understanding, this kind of the hostile sexism towards women it wasn't high, but I thought it'd be nothing. And there was actually something there. So I was like, I wonder what that's about. So again, just kind of getting curious about it.
Just curious, could that be from a fairly sexist society where women have to fight so hard for what little they were offered?
I mean, I would say that I am certainly formed, if we're talking about like what kinds of places are we embedded that form us, right? So this kind of thing gets to your question a little bit. Like, I was raised in the South, in a fairly patriarchal society, certainly a patriarchal church. I would say my dad was not as patriarchal, but it wasn't really until I became a campus minister that I realized I'm not welcome in my church to teach anyone above elementary school kids. And yet I'm doing a campus ministry where I'm preaching to college students and beyond. And it was that sort of discordant moment that I realized, like, I'm gonna have to fight for myself. And I'm gonna go to Fuller because I need to go somewhere where I can be around people who are like-minded. And so certainly, Paul, I think I've been shaped in a way to have to think about these authority issues and patriarchal issues. I'm just not quite sure kind of like, where did my negative feelings towards women come from? And I'm not sure. I don't know if there's kind of an overcorrection sometimes that happens, where I'm trying to be more giving towards men and their hopes to kind of their roles as well. So I don't know. I have to think through it a little bit more, but it's a good question. Other thoughts? Anything else on maybe on the assessments or on bias or prejudice?
I want to share a little bit about that that what's that called, ambivalent sexism test. It's really make me very uncomfortable by all those labeling, like a label, like, oh, okay, if you think, like, if you have this kind of thoughts around women, then you are a sexist. Then I find that's really damaging or crashing, because we are all imperfect people. We all have a little bit of this and that. And if I'm a little bit off, then I am a sexist. I feel like that's much more damaging than what I, than the thought itself. I want to share that we are much more than our buyers, not just our buyer. We are much more than our buyer. We are much more our prejudice. We are much more than our best, or we are much more than our worst. So that test really make me like I was doing it, and I feel like very uncomfortable, not because I find what's big thing inside me, but because of all those label, like I feel like I was, put all that label by that test on me, and that's really damaging. I feel like it crushed my my spirit.
Yeah. I'm sorry that it felt crushing to you. I think I really liked how you said we are much more than our biases. And I think that's spot on. I would say that that's true even for last week. I think it was Dr. Tama Bryant Davis that said we're much more than our trauma, right? That there are these aspects of us, but that's not the whole of who we are. And I think that that's true. I think it was Paul maybe that said that, all of these kinds of tests, honestly, especially if they're online and free, are going to be, they're going to have some, and I'm not saying they're flawed because they're free, but they're empirically supported, and yet they're going to have flaws. They're going to be not enough of what we want. Like, I'm like, what does this mean? I think if I can encourage you, Ping, kind of what we're talking about, if you get back information that says, you know, you are biased in this particular way, if you jump to, well, then I must be a sexist person, I must be a racist person, I must be a fill in the blankist person, then that can cause you to shut down. And I don't think that that's the purpose of these tests. The purpose is really to get curious. So if you can get past the, that feels uncomfortable, I don't like labels, I don't want to be labeled, there's much more to who I am than this little label. If we can all accept that that's true, then you can get curious and say, okay, so if there's something here, what is it about me that I have a little bit of hostile sexism towards women? Like, what's that about? I know I'm not, like, I'm very pro women and feminism and all of that, but I can get curious about, like, what is this, without having to shut down because I feel bad about myself and what it's telling me I am. I don't know. How does that land for you, Ping?
No, I have no issue. Yeah, I have no issue. Yeah.
Other responses to that or thoughts about that?
I think that's a very good observation. And the way I've seen these tests in the past and what's helped me is to see them as a spectrum. So when it comes to sexism, racism, any isms really, there's a spectrum for it. But a lot of times when we take this test, it might reveal that we have a little bit of those in us, but doesn't mean that we are officially at the extreme end of it. It could just mean like, hey, let's pay attention to this and see what ways this might come out in conversations or in situations or in our decision making, so that we don't go to the extreme of it. Because I think a lot of times people who are at the extreme are not even aware. It may not even be intentional, but a lot of these tests I feel like are a way to highlight some things that may be in us that we can, I mean, when we talk about the theological aspect of it, we can present to the Lord and just ask God to continue that sanctifying work in us so that we don't get to the extreme ends of these things. So I hope it's not saying that, oh my gosh, because I have a little bit of this in me, I'm officially a sexist. I don't think the test is saying that, but I think it's just drawing attention to what areas we might be able to just be aware of and be mindful of moving forward.
And Ping, I found the way the format on the sexism part of the test, yeah, it was a little irksome. I don't know, annoying. I mean, it was a little different, but you know, I gotta assume that the researchers know what they're doing. They must have tested on an awful lot of people to get some credibility. But it was not how I would have asked questions, and they were annoying.
I want to circle back. Ping, I want to make sure, does that seem to settle well with you? I wanted to circle back to your other question, but I wanted to make sure we're feeling good here. Okay. So Ping, is it okay if I go back to your other question that you wrote in the chat? Okay, cool. And I'd love to just invite you all into this because you've been reading about embodied cognition. Bye, Paul. Good to see you. How would you name it? Like, how would you describe what it is you're reading on embodied cognition?
I'm going to take a flyer here and try to describe something that's actually pretty complex. The way I understood a good portion of the Strawn and Brown reading was, in some ways, I felt like what they were saying is that, you know, our mind, while it stems out of our bodily experience, it's not necessarily contained solely within our body, and that our cognition can, can be connected with other people. It can be connected with devices, and that our thinking is taking place through those other people or through those devices. And I think the part that really was like meaningful for me was, the way they draw Christian community into that discussion of embodied cognition, and how, we are a part of a body, and that, I think the example that he gave of, there may be an issue about which I don't have enough belief. But if I'm connected with people, if I have a community around me, I don't know if I would say I could rely on their belief, but their belief can help support me even in that area where, or that time that I might not have enough belief. So I guess that's the kind of extended cognition that I really had a good time kind of thinking about, pondering.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great summary. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, there's this way in which I think one of the more provocative things that they said was that we can't be a Christian by ourselves. And I think I wrote this in my email as well. You can have a particular form of spirituality by yourself. We know that is true, but it's not going to be as deep and as robust if you weren't embedded with other believers in a particular context, right? So it's kind of mind-blowing, but your mind is literally expanded and extended because you are embedded in a community with other people. So I love the example of people can help you believe when you can't believe. I mean, I don't exactly know how that works, but there is this way in which people can help us either by modeling or just kind of in the same context, helping me to extend my faith because your thinking is connected to my thinking. And I need your thinking in order to expand my mind. Is not a way that I think we think in churches very often. It's much more of a communal, integrated way of doing faith than at least I would say is my tradition.
I'm 100% agree with the author because I come from an Asian background and I just moved here, California 2 years ago. So the past 10 years I was in Shanghai. I grew up and raised spiritually in church in Shanghai. So we are like everything that the author talk about, I experience. We move forward in God's kingdom as a community of people other than just myself. And when I was with that group of people, I truly like in my prime and I flourish in my eyes when I just talking about future and talking about God and talking about people. My eyes are full of sparkling like stars. And I can feel here after I got here 2 years, and I was really like struggling, to find a community of believers who share the same faith, who want to move forward in God's kingdom. No matter how hard I try to get close to God, I just feel like I'm just like the fire. I can't. The fire can't burn on itself. You need other I don't know how to describe that, but you got what I mean. So I feel myself withered. I feel myself withered. I feel like I really struggle spiritually because nobody is there holding me. When I fall, there's nobody there holding me. So I have a deep understanding of what the author is talking. And I went to the church here. I experienced that difference. In Asia, in our culture, we're like a community of people, a group of people that working together. But here, I more feel like myself, myself. If I want to grow, okay, I have like, I'm on my own. Like if I want to grow in God's kingdom, I'm on my own. So yeah, that's
Yeah, Ping, thank you for explaining, for letting us into that part of your life. And it sounds hard. It sounds like it's been a hard transition. And you actually have very, very well explained this idea of embodied and extended cognition. So your culture, your collectivist culture has shaped you in particular ways to think about various things, to think about your faith in particular ways. And then if you're put into a more individualist culture, and many churches may think that their way is the right way, like this is the norm. We talked about this last time. The norm is that it's me and mine, and it's my personal practices. And I think spirituality can be personal, but I don't think it's supposed to be private, right? I think that there is this way in which we are called to share in this spirituality, right? And so I think what has happened is that you've been shaped in a particular way. One could argue that's perhaps more closer to Christian community in its ties to one another. And then when you're put into this context and try to do the same things that your brain knows to do, it doesn't work as well. It feels like there's this miss. I think that that's just really important to, it's painful and it's important to recognize, like it's not about you and something wrong with you. It's that you have been trained, your body is ready to participate in that fire you talked about in a particular way with your faith. And we're normed, particularly I think in Western evangelical churches, towards a particular bent. And if we don't recognize that, then we're gonna have a lot of people who try to come to our churches and turn away because they don't feel like they fit. I don't know, thoughts there?
I think this is why diversity is so important, to bring in all our different perspectives. In the video, Dr. Strong talked about how the person of the pastor matters and how that person's experiences and life and upbringing affects the way that they see scripture and the way that they teach scripture. But imagine how much richer it would be if someone like Ping coming from her background and someone like Amy from your background and my background and Colin's background, and we all work together in the same church sharing our different perspectives because of our different experiences. Then maybe fewer people would feel like I have to church hop to try to find the place that I can fit in, instead of it being a collective effort to try to see everyone as who they are and what they bring to the table. So yeah, it's hard. It feels like every church is kind of set on their own way, and it's your responsibility to find the one that fits your flavor the best, and that's exhausting.
Yeah. I talked a little bit to Dr. Strawn about his book, and he said, I think one of the major questions behind this book is, why is church even important anymore? Why is it important to think about church? I think I could fall into this camp. Like, now that I can do it online, why would I get dressed up and, drive a few blocks to my church? So there's this sense of, I think we've been shaped in new ways by the pandemic. And I think we're circling back around to say, why is church important? And then Ping, when you have your example of, I've tried church, but it just doesn't really I don't seem to fit in the system. I think it's just a lot of people are kind of like, is it all that important anymore? And so they don't go. We know that question is happening because less people are going to church these days, right? So proof is in the pudding. And so I think the importance of Christian community, the importance of thinking through what is normed in our Christian community, how we do life together that's inclusive. We're going to talk about family systems in a week or so and how it connects to church systems, and think through the ways that we have toxic systems potentially in our churches, and how we can use language from more of our MFT brothers and sisters to look at our church systems. But I think it's a critical question, like, how do we do church well? It's not that it's a new question, but I think it has new aspects to it, based on, I don't know, when you've learned that you can do it from home, and you don't actually have to bring your body to church, and you can still get church in some ways. Like, how do you go back? How do you re-enter that world where extended bodily cognition is important, right? That it's actually critical to how we are formed. I just talked a lot there. Any thoughts?
It's not the same, you know, like when we meet face in face, you know, you can hug that person, you can see his eyes or her eyes, you can see she's smiling or she's having a bad day, you can give her a hug and you can welcome her. Like your whole body, your whole being is there speaking to that person and ministering to that person. So it's not just the intellectual, the words, that is passing through one person to other person, but your whole energy is passing from one person to another person. I think that's what, you know, that's why God gave us a body. In that body, when one body is sick, the other body maybe nourish you, you know, so you can come back to life. But like in an environment like everybody is on their own, if I want my spirituality on my own, so we are like, we can't get nutrition from anywhere because we are on our own. So yeah, that's really yeah, that's
preach it, Ping. Said it well. That's right. Yeah. And you know, I'm in a course learning how to teach for Fuller, and we are learning about the differences between doing video chats like this and doing online kind of written forums. And I think there's even a difference there, right? There's an anonymity that you can have when you're writing a forum, that the risk that you all took just to be here and to put your faces on the screen and talk about things and be recorded. I think, I mean, there's something more intentional there. I think there's something that's being passed in between us, that's extending our cognition. Our bodies are involved, you know, in some ways. You can see my hands moving. Like there's things that are evident that you can't see on Twitter, you know, or on an online forum, or you know, I'm not bashing Twitter, but I'm just saying those kinds of social media outlets. What part of humanity are we losing when we're so distanced behind technology, right? As a therapist and a spiritual director, I find that listening, the skill of listening to someone speak and kind of taking in what they're saying and reflecting it back to them is an incredibly important skill for leaders. And yet it's just very different when someone's typing out a forum post and then you're reading it and then you're responding. Are we losing, I mean, this is maybe like too dramatic, but are we losing the ability to listen and reflect people? Which I think is like you're saying, it's a critical skill to be in front of people and have that ability to converse. So, and yet most students probably won't come to Fuller if they're not going to be able to take online courses. So that's the truth, right? We have to figure out how to do this well. Anyway, I'm veering into my nerdy higher ed stuff, but so I just want to make sure, as we talk about embodied cognition, extended cognition, Ping, do you feel like you have a little bit of a better sense of what we're talking about, or does it still feel like it's goofy? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think if I could boil it down, there's two different things. Like we think with our bodies, and so because we have different bodies, we're going to process things differently. So the ways that as a woman and a man, you're going to process things differently. just all of the different ways that we're formed, race, gender, nationality, all of these various ways that that will shape how we think. And we're also embedded in cultures that are different. So we've learned from our family systems, we've learned from our church systems, we've learned from our school system to be particular ways. That also shapes how we think. And so I think it circles back to the conversation we started with, which is how can we be aware of those ways that we are formed, the ways that the context we've been embedded in. If I have a very individualistic context, if I'm aware of that, I think what Laura said, and not act into it, but be able to be aware that I need to act differently, to be more open to other people. So it's becoming aware of the ways that we are shaped to think in particular ways. I could have just said that at the beginning, that would have been easier. But that's basically what we're talking about here. I don't want to keep us if we don't have any more, but I'm just curious, are there any other questions that you have or things you're curious about? This has been a great conversation. I'm really, really grateful. But any other thoughts?
I just was going to mention that, kind of circling back to the last topic where we were talking about, virtual groups or church online or that kind of thing. So like I participate pretty actively in support groups. And so that was one thing about the pandemic, that they really migrated online pretty quickly because, people who need those support groups need those support groups, right? And so there's, there's information can get conveyed via Zoom pretty well. And even I think sometimes if you have some history with the person, even though you're interacting, via Zoom with them, if you know a little bit of their backstory, even some emotion can get, conveyed electronically. So you can experience, maybe some empathy for what they're going through, or some, happiness or sadness or whatever the case may be. Even though you're just watching them on a screen, you can still have that kind of emotional response to it. But as the pandemic has changed, so we went from an environment 2 years ago where literally that was the only thing. They were online meetings. And then slowly but surely, as things have opened up again, now the one thing that's nice about the online environment is, people aren't limited to their physical location. They can be participating with people in a group who are spread out all over the country and have at this point built relationships with, because they've been doing it for 2+ years now. But there is something quite different about being in a room with people. Like, one thing that the online environment does not mimic or provide is when someone says something funny and everyone in the room laughs. And you can watch people on the screen laugh, but it's not the same feeling that you get when you're in the room and there's a big burst of laughter. Or, if somebody has to say something, or somebody shares something that's painful or difficult, it's hard to pat them on the back or give them a hug after the meeting when it's on Zoom. Whereas, in person, there's that kind of human contact and connection that can happen. So it's interesting to see, how the strengths and drawbacks of the different venues and different mediums.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I completely agree. As Colin was speaking, as we were talking about the Twitter, like typing out stuff versus, or even class forum versus video versus in person, I was thinking again of a spectrum, like the level of connection. Being in person is the highest level of connection we can have, where you see, like what Ping was, like the whole body, you see everything, whether they're crossing their legs, whether they're exhausted, everything, nothing can be hidden in that context. But I think what was missing when we went online, that I've noticed, is that small talk that I never paid attention to till we went online, where before class starts or on a break, that's where you kind of get to catch up with people. And we don't have that online with Zoom. There's no small talk chat time before and after meetings and gatherings. So that part has been missing in the relationship. And then typing out stuff, I feel like there's just really, I don't know how pen pals did it back in the day, but it just feels like there's really no relationship. And I even remember that on Twitter, a celebrity took a screenshot of like they call them like keyboard bullies, people who just are mean online and will say things that they'll never say in person. And he responded to someone who was just really mean. And the person's response was, "Oh, I didn't think you were going to actually see that and respond." And he was like, "I'm a human being. Like, why would you say this to me online when you would never say this to me via voice, like even if it's video?" Or so there's this, yeah, it's a level of disconnect, I guess, not connection, a level of disconnect that happens the further away we go from being in person. So yeah, but I like the connection of being around the world, different people. So it's, yeah, pros and cons, it's hard.
I was just thinking, Colin, and thanks for that, Laura. I was just thinking, Colin, as you were talking, like, ooh, this is going to be a great case study for you if you choose to do this for your final paper. But like, what are the positives and benefits of, as we think about extended cognition with the population in which you work? I mean, what are the important pieces of being together, and how does that bring healing versus, other ways that we could think about doing it? So I just was, as you were talking through it, I was like, ooh, this is interesting stuff. So keep thinking about the readings and how they can work into your final paper, your final case study. Well, thanks everybody. Really good. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Colin? Go ahead.
I probably shouldn't, but I'm like kooky enough. I mean, this is going to sound really weird. I'm kooky enough to think that other people's brain waves can have an influence on us. And so that doesn't take place online, right? I think that requires proximity. And, some of that is based on, some of my experience with needing to be around other people who kind of know the thing that I need to learn how to do. And so they kind of teach me through information, but also maybe just the way their brain is working is a good influence on me, or the way their emotions are processing is a good influence on me. So I don't want to sound like a kook, but
you're not kooky. Actually, that's scientifically proven. I mean, there are ways in which I think we're trying to understand how waves kind of go back and forth between people, but we certainly have these what we call mirror neurons. So like when I see you, there's something that impacts me. And I think that there's something about being in person. I've not read any studies about this, but I would say there's probably a difference online versus in person. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are studies that kind of help us understand, as we're embodied with one another, as our bodies interact, that there's something going on in between that we can't always explain. But so I don't think it's kooky. I don't know, Laura, do you know of any particular studies on that?
Not a specific study, but as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how when we're in person, after a while with the same people, our mannerisms start to look similar, the same, without us realizing it. So yeah, we do pick up on things from other people just being in their presence all the time. But yeah, I haven't seen that online because, yeah, I don't see anyone picking up anyone else's mannerisms online.
There's less modeling, less mimicking that happens probably in person. Yeah, I mean online. Yeah. Oh, so much to talk about. You guys are so interesting. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Really good to talk, and we'll see you next week if you choose to be here. So thanks everyone. Bye.
Have a good week, everyone.
You too.